Billionaire CEO takes girlfriend shopping, then faces pregnant ex-wife in unexpected showdown. What happened next? Welcome, dearest souls, new to our family. Share your beautiful name below. We can't wait to meet you. To our cherished returning family, you are the heart of our journey, and we're so grateful for you. Subscribe to stay part of this incredible path of love, hope, and healing. Every story we share is a gift chosen just for you. Now take a deep, loving breath, and let the story of a lifetime begin. The crystal chandeliers of the St. Regis Hotel's grand ballroom cast a warm glow over the Morgan & Stanley Investment Gala, where San Francisco's financial elite mingled like expertly placed chess pieces on a gilded board. Greta Klusner stood near one of the towering windows, her modest black cocktail dress a stark contrast to the designer gowns that sparkled around her. At 28, she was one of the youngest financial analysts in the room, and certainly one of the few who had arrived by rideshare rather than private car. The autumn wind rattled the tall windows, and Greta took another sip of champagne, mentally calculating how long she needed to stay to make a good impression on the senior partners. Her shoulder-length dark hair was styled in elegant waves, a splurge at a salon she couldn't really afford, and her green eyes scanned the room with the same analytical precision she applied to market trends. "Harrison can't possibly be serious about the cryptocurrency regulations," a deep voice said behind her, responding to a conversation she'd been quietly following among a group of investment bankers. The market implications would be catastrophic. Greta turned, her analytical mind already forming counter-arguments, and found herself looking up into the most intensely blue eyes she'd ever seen. Donald Cullinan, the tech world's golden boy, stood before her in a perfectly tailored Tom Ford tuxedo that probably cost more than her annual salary. At 35, he had already built Cullinan Technologies into a $50 billion empire, pioneering breakthrough developments in artificial intelligence and quantum computing. "Actually," Greta heard herself say before her professional instincts could stop her, "Harrison's proposals could stabilize the crypto market in ways traditional regulations haven't achieved." She took another sip of champagne, her heart racing at her own boldness. Donald's eyebrows rose, interest flickering across his aristocratic features. The sharp angles of his jaw softened as a smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Most people at these events just agree with whatever I say," he said, stepping closer. "Please, enlighten me." For the next 20 minutes, they engaged in a passionate debate about cryptocurrency regulations, market dynamics, and the future of digital currency. Greta found herself gesturing animatedly as she explained complex financial concepts, completely forgetting who she was talking to. Donald matched her enthusiasm, challenging her points and offering insightful counter-arguments. "You're absolutely brilliant," he said finally, looking at her with newfound respect. "And refreshingly honest. I don't think anyone has disagreed with me so thoroughly in years." He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes, transforming his whole face. "I'm Donald Cullinan." "I know who you are, Mr. Cullinan," Greta replied, unable to help her slight smirk. "Your quantum computing breakthrough made headlines last quarter. I'm Greta Klusner, junior analyst at Morgan & Stanley." "Please, call me Donald," he said, signaling a waiter for fresh champagne. "Tell me, Greta, what are your thoughts on AI ethics in financial markets?" "I have a feeling you won't disappoint me with a conventional answer." The conversation flowed effortlessly from topic to topic. Donald was surprisingly down-to-earth, with a quick wit that matched his intelligence. He listened intently as Greta shared her ideas about implementing ethical AI in high-frequency trading, his eyes never leaving her face. She noticed small details about him, the way he ran his hand through his dark hair when he was thinking deeply, the slight Boston accent that crept into his voice when he got excited about a topic. Around them, the gala continued in full swing, but they remained in their own bubble of intellectual discourse. Several people tried to interrupt, hoping to grab a moment of Donald's attention, but he politely deflected them all. Victoria Chen, his executive assistant, approached twice with urgent matters, only to be waved away. Something Greta would later learn was highly unusual for the famously workaholic CEO. As the evening wore on, they migrated to a quiet corner near the terrace. The San Francisco skyline glittered behind them like a constellation of earthbound stars. Donald ordered small plates from the passing servers, insisting Greta try the beluga caviar and wagyu beef canapes. She found herself relaxing, charmed by his genuine interest in her opinions and his self-deprecating humor about his own privileged background. "I grew up in Oakland," Greta shared, picking up a tiny quail egg hors d'oeuvre. "My mom was a high school teacher. She passed away 2 years ago, but she's the reason I went into finance. She taught me that understanding money was the key to independence." Donald's face softened with genuine sympathy. "She sounds like a remarkable woman. My parents, well, let's just say they were more interested in their social standing than their son. The company became my family in many ways." He paused, studying her face. "It's refreshing to meet someone who sees beyond all of this." He gestured to the opulent ballroom. As midnight approached, Greta reluctantly checked her phone. "I should probably head home. Some of us have regular working hours," she teased. "Let me have my driver take you home," Donald offered, already reaching for his phone. "That's very kind, but I already booked a ride," Greta replied, maintaining her independence despite his wealth. "This has been unexpected." "Have dinner with me tomorrow?" Donald said. Not quite a question, but not quite a demand either. "There's this little place in North Beach that makes authentic Italian food. No pretense, just incredible pasta and good conversation." Greta hesitated, her practical nature warring with the undeniable connection she felt. "I don't typically mix business with pleasure," she said carefully. "Then let's keep pleasure entirely separate from business," Donald replied with a charming smile. "I promise not to mention cryptocurrency regulations even once." Against her better judgment, Greta found herself agreeing. Donald insisted on programming his private number into her phone, his fingers brushing hers in a touch that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. As she waited for her ride outside, Victoria Chen emerged from the hotel, her Louboutin heels clicking on the pavement. "Ms. Klusner," she said, her tone perfectly professional but her eyes sharp. "Mr. Cullinan asked me to give you this." She handed Greta a business card with a handwritten note on the back. "In case you change your mind about that ride, looking forward to tomorrow. D." Greta tucked the card into her clutch, unaware that this simple moment would mark the beginning of a story that would shake Silicon Valley to its core. As her ride pulled up to the curb, she glanced back at the gleaming hotel. Through the window, she could see Donald in conversation with some executives, but his eyes were on her, watching her leave. The cool San Francisco night wrapped around her as she slid into the car. Her sensible mind told her to be cautious. Men like Donald Cullinan didn't typically date junior analysts who shopped at department stores. But there had been something in his eyes, something genuine beneath the wealthy exterior, that made her wonder if perhaps this time her instincts about people might be worth trusting. Little did she know that this chance encounter would set in motion a chain of events that would transform not only her life, but the entire landscape of Silicon Valley's tech empire. As her car pulled away from the St. Regis, Greta was simply a brilliant young woman who'd had an interesting conversation with a fascinating man. The universe, however, had much bigger plans for Greta Klusner and Donald Cullinan, plans that would test the limits of love, trust, and redemption. Whirlwind romance. The intimate Italian restaurant in North Beach, Bella Notte, was exactly as Donald had described. A hidden gem, tucked away from tourist crowds, with weathered brick walls and vintage Chianti bottles converted into candle holders. Greta arrived 10 minutes early, smoothing down her emerald green dress as she was led to a corner table. The dress had been an impulse purchase during her lunch break, something she'd probably regret when her credit card bill arrived, but tonight she wanted to feel special. Donald arrived precisely on time, looking more casual but no less commanding in a charcoal blazer and dark jeans that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His face lit up when he saw her, and he leaned in to kiss her cheek, his cologne a subtle mix of cedar and bergamot. "You look stunning," he said, his eyes taking in the green dress that matched her eyes. "I was worried you might change your mind." "I considered it," Greta admitted, accepting the menu from the elderly waiter who clearly knew Donald well. "My colleague Sophie spent all day telling me about your reputation with women." Donald's expression flickered with something between annoyance and resignation. "And what reputation is that?" "That you're San Francisco's most eligible bachelor for a reason. That you never date anyone longer than 3 months. That your last girlfriend was a Victoria's Secret model." Greta met his eyes directly, her characteristic honesty shining through. He leaned back, swirling the wine the sommelier had just poured. "Would you believe me if I said those relationships ended because I never met anyone who could challenge me the way you did last night? Anyone who saw past the bank account and the company?" "I'm not sure what I believe yet," Greta replied, taking a sip of her own wine. "But I'm here to find out." That set the tone for their relationship, honest, direct, and increasingly intense. Their first date stretched into 4 hours of conversation, covering everything from their childhoods to their dreams for the future. Donald spoke about growing up in Boston's elite society, the pressure of family expectations, and his rebellion in choosing tech over investment banking. Greta shared stories about her mother's battle with cancer, putting herself through Berkeley on scholarships, and her determination to succeed in the male-dominated world of finance. The next 2 weeks became a blur of increasingly romantic encounters. Donald sent his private car to pick her up for impromptu dinners, arranged rooftop jazz concerts just for them, and once had the California Academy of Sciences opened after hours so they could walk through the aquarium alone. Yet it was the smaller moments that captured Greta's heart. The way he remembered how she liked her coffee, his genuine interest in her analysis of market trends, the books he recommended that showed the depth of his intellect. Victoria Chen, however, remained a constant shadow in their budding romance. She would appear with urgent documents requiring Donald's signature just as he and Greta were settling into dinner, or call with emergency board meetings during their weekend plans. Donald seemed oblivious to his assistant's tactical interruptions, but Greta noticed the calculating looks Victoria gave her when she thought no one was watching. 3 weeks into their relationship, Donald surprised Greta with a weekend trip to Paris on his private jet. She initially refused, citing work obligations, but he'd already cleared it with her supervisors. "Sometimes," he told her as they soared over the Atlantic, "you have to let yourself be swept away." Paris was like a dream. They stayed in the presidential suite of the Four Seasons George V, with a terrace overlooking the Eiffel Tower. Donald hired a private guide to show them hidden art galleries in Le Marais, arranged a midnight picnic in the gardens of Versailles, which he'd somehow gotten special permission to access, and took her shopping at exclusive boutiques where the price tags made her dizzy. "You don't have to buy me anything," Greta protested as he insisted she try on a Chanel dress. "I'm not with you for this." Donald pulled her close, kissing her temple. "That's exactly why I want to give you everything." Yet amid the luxury and glamour, it was their quiet moments that felt most precious. Late at night, They would walk along the Seine, talking about their hopes and fears. Donald confessed his loneliness at the top of his corporate empire, the pressure of maintaining his success, and his fear of becoming like his emotionally distant parents. Greta shared her insecurities about fitting into his world, her determination to succeed on her own merits, and her dream of making her late mother proud. The physical attraction between them was undeniable, but Greta insisted on taking things slowly. Donald, surprisingly, respected her boundaries, though his kisses grew more passionate with each passing day. There was an intensity to their connection that both thrilled and frightened her. Back in San Francisco, their relationship became the talk of the tech world. Page 6 ran stories about the billionaire CEO and the brilliant analyst who had captured his heart. Paparazzi started camping outside Greta's modest apartment, prompting Donald to insist she move into his Pacific Heights mansion for security reasons. She declined, maintaining her independence despite his increasingly persuasive arguments. "I have a perfectly good apartment," she told him one evening as they sat on his terrace overlooking the bay. "An apartment where photographers harass you daily," he countered, pulling her closer on the outdoor sofa. "I hate thinking of you dealing with that alone." "I can handle photographers, Donald. I'm more concerned about handling you." She turned to face him, her expression serious. "This is moving so fast. Sometimes I feel like I'm living in a fairy tale, and I'm waiting for midnight when everything turns back into a pumpkin." He cupped her face in his hands, his blue eyes intense. "This is real, Greta. What I feel for you. I've never experienced anything like it. You're brilliant, beautiful, and you see me. Not the CEO, not the billionaire, but me." Their romance continued to intensify over the next few weeks. Donald took her to Monaco for the Grand Prix, where they spent days on his yacht and evenings at exclusive parties. He introduced her to tech industry legends and European royalty as the woman who keeps me honest. Greta handled it all with remarkable poise, though she never quite got used to the way wealth could open any door. Yet there were subtle warning signs she chose to ignore. The way Donald would tense up if she spent too much time talking to other men at events. How Victoria Chen seemed to be keeping a dossier on her activities. The calculating looks from Donald's board members when they thought she wasn't watching. 1 month into their relationship, they attended a charity gala at the De Young Museum. Donald had donated a significant sum to the children's art program, and the evening was meant to celebrate the program's expansion. Greta wore a stunning red gown he had surprised her with, feeling both confident and slightly out of her depth among the city's elite. "You know what they're saying about you," Victoria murmured as she passed Greta at the bar. "That you're the most ambitious gold digger yet. That you planned this from the moment you saw him at the Morgan & Stanley event." Greta met her gaze steadily. "What they say about me matters far less than what I know about myself." Later that night, in Donald's limousine, he presented her with a Harry Winston bracelet. "You handled Victoria beautifully," he said, fastening the diamonds around her wrist. "She's just protective of me." "She's territorial," Greta corrected him, "and you allow it." Instead of addressing her concern, he kissed her deeply, and in the intoxicating moment, she let the issue drop. It was a pattern that would prove costly in the months to come. His tendency to deflect difficult conversations with grand gestures and passionate moments. As their second month together drew to a close, Donald planned a weekend trip to his vineyard in Napa. The property was stunning, with rolling hills covered in pristine grapevines and a modern villa that seemed to float above the landscape. They spent the day wine tasting, touring the production facility, and walking through the vineyards. That evening, after too many glasses of his private reserve Cabernet, they made love for the first time in the master suite overlooking the valley. The next morning, Greta woke alone in the massive bed, wrapped in expensive sheets. She found Donald on the terrace, already on his phone dealing with a crisis at the company. Victoria's voice echoed from the speakerphone, discussing board member concerns and market projections. Something about the scene? Donald immediately switching back to CEO mode, the ever-present Victoria inserting herself into their intimate weekend, gave Greta her first real moment of doubt. But when Donald looked up and smiled at her, all her concerns melted away. He ended the call abruptly, pulled her onto his lap, and they spent the morning making love again, the business world temporarily forgotten. They were living in a bubble of passion and possibility, both of them too caught up in the intensity of their feelings to see the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The press dubbed them Silicon Valley's golden couple, and their every appearance together made headlines. Donald showered her with gifts, rare books he knew she'd love, intimate dinners at exclusive restaurants, unexpected flowers at her office. Yet beneath the fairy tale romance, forces were gathering that would test their love in ways neither could imagine. Victoria Chen continued her subtle campaign of undermining Greta's confidence, while Donald's board members whispered about his judgment being clouded by love. And in just a few weeks, a charity ball would set in motion events that would change everything. Though on this beautiful Napa morning, with the sun rising over the vineyards and Donald's arms around her, such a future seemed impossible. A night that changed everything. The San Francisco Symphony's annual black and white ball was the crown jewel of the city's fall social calendar. Held in the opulent War Memorial Opera House, it was an evening where old money mingled with tech billionaires, where social hierarchies were both rigidly maintained and subtly challenged. For Greta, it would become the night that altered the course of her entire life. The day began normally enough. She spent the morning at Morgan & Stanley, analyzing market trends and trying to ignore the whispers that followed her through the office. 3 months of dating Donald had transformed her from a respected junior analyst into someone viewed through a lens of either envy or suspicion. Her colleagues now seemed to divide themselves into 2 camps, those who sought her favor as a connection to Donald Cullinan and those who dismissed her as merely his latest conquest. Victoria Chen called just as Greta was leaving for her hair appointment. "Donald insists you wear the Bulgari necklace he bought you last week," she said, her tone professionally pleasant but underlined with its usual hint of condescension. "He thinks it will complement your dress perfectly." "Thank you, Victoria," Greta replied evenly, "but I've already chosen my grandmother's pearl necklace for tonight." It was a small act of defiance, but an important one. These little power plays with Victoria had become increasingly frequent. "As you wish," Victoria responded, "though it seems a shame to attend such a prestigious event wearing family heirlooms." The pause before the last 2 words carried volumes of judgment. Greta ended the call and tried to shake off her irritation as she entered the salon. The stylist had been briefed extensively on the look Donald wanted, an elegant updo that would showcase the necklace she had just declined to wear. Another small act of rebellion. Greta asked for soft waves instead. The Valentino gown Donald had selected was delivered to her apartment by his personal shopper, a black creation that seemed to be woven from starlight itself. Greta had to admit it was breathtaking, though she missed the days when she chose her own clothes. The dress came with a handwritten note. "Can't wait to see you outshine everyone tonight. All my love, D." Donald's driver arrived precisely at 7. Happy hour was in full swing at the local bars, and Greta caught glimpses of normal Friday night life as the Bentley glided through the city. Friends meeting for drinks, couples walking hand in hand, people living their lives without the weight of constant public scrutiny. A part of her missed that simplicity. The car pulled up to the opera house where photographers were already assembled in force. Donald was waiting at the top of the stairs, devastating in his tuxedo, his blue eyes lighting up when he saw her. But there was something different about him tonight. A slight unsteadiness in his stance, a too bright glitter in his eyes. "You're not wearing the necklace," he said, as he helped her from the car, his words slightly slurred. The cameras flashed around them like artificial lightning. "I wanted to wear my grandmother's pearls," Greta replied, noting the nearly empty champagne glass in his hand. "Donald, how many of those have you had?" "A few," he shrugged, guiding her up the stairs with a hand that gripped her elbow a bit too tightly. "Had to endure a board meeting today. Harrison's giving me grief about the new AI ethics protocols you convinced me to implement." Inside, the opera house had been transformed into a glittering wonderland. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across the black and white decor, while a full orchestra played on the stage. San Francisco's elite moved through the space like exotic birds, their designer plumage on full display. Victoria materialized almost immediately, sleek in a white Tom Ford gown. "Donald, the mayor is asking for you. Something about the new tech initiative." She cast a dismissive glance at Greta's pearls. "I can keep Greta company." "I'm capable of socializing on my own," Greta said firmly, but Donald was already moving away, grabbing another champagne flute from a passing waiter. The next hour was a blur of polite conversations and careful navigation of social landmines. Greta noticed Donald's drinking escalating, watched him become progressively more animated in his discussions with various power players. She tried to intervene several times, but Victoria always managed to steer him toward another crucial conversation. It was nearly midnight when she finally cornered him on one of the upper balconies. The city sparkled below them, a carpet of lights stretching to the bay. "I think we should head home," she suggested gently. "You've had quite a bit to drink." Donald turned to her, his face flushed. "You're always trying to control things, aren't you? First the necklace, now this. You know, Victoria says—" "I don't care what Victoria says," Greta interrupted, her patience finally snapping. "I care that you're drunk at a charity event, making business deals you might not remember tomorrow." He moved closer, his cologne mingling with the sharp scent of champagne. "You're magnificent when you're angry," he murmured, pulling her against him. "Let's get out of here. I want you all to myself." Despite her better judgment, Greta allowed him to lead her to his waiting car. The ride to his Pacific Heights mansion was tense, filled with a dangerous kind of electricity. Donald's hand kept sliding up her thigh, his touch increasingly insistent. She gently removed it each time, growing more uncomfortable with his inebriated state. The mansion was dark when they arrived, the staff dismissed for the night. Donald was on her as soon as they entered the foyer, his kisses aggressive, lacking their usual finesse. "Donald, stop!" Greta said firmly, pushing against his chest. "You're drunk. This isn't right." "Don't you love me?" he demanded, his words slurring slightly. "After everything I've given you?" "Given me?" Greta stepped back, hurt flooding her chest. "Is that what you think this is about? What you've given me?" He pursued her up the grand staircase, his usual charm replaced by something darker. "Everyone knows why you're with me, Greta. Let's not pretend otherwise." He caught her arm, pulling her close again. "But I don't care. You're mine." What happened next became a blur in Greta's memory, a collage of moments she would later try to piece together. His insistent hands, her weakening protests, the way the alcohol seemed to transform him into someone she didn't recognize. She remembered the feel of expensive silk sheets against her skin, the weight of him pressing her down, the moment she stopped saying no, because it seemed easier to let it happen. Dawn found her alone in his bed, her body tender, her mind struggling to process the night's events. She dressed quietly, gathered her things, and ordered a rideshare home. Donald was passed out in his study, an empty bottle of scotch on his desk. The next week passed in a haze of confusion and denial. Donald sent flowers with apologetic notes, left voicemails that ranged from remorseful to defensive. Victoria called repeatedly to schedule dinner meetings for discussing the situation. Greta ignored them all, throwing herself into her work, trying to pretend everything was normal. But 6 weeks later, staring at a positive pregnancy test in her tiny apartment bathroom, normal became a distant memory. 3 tests from different brands all showed the same result. The timing aligned perfectly with that night, the night she'd tried so hard to forget. Greta sat on her bathroom floor for hours, her grandmother's pearls clutched in her hand like a talisman, trying to decide what to do. She thought about her mother, about the strength she'd shown as a single parent. She thought about Donald, about the man she'd fallen in love with and the stranger he'd become that night. Finally, she picked up her phone and dialed his private number. His excited greeting suggested he'd been waiting for her call. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "It's important." "Come to the office," he replied immediately. "I've missed you so much, Greta. We can fix this." The drive to Cullinan Technologies headquarters gave her time to steady herself, to rehearse what she would say. But nothing could have prepared her for what awaited her there. Victoria Chen met her in the lobby, her perfect composure a sharp contrast to Greta's emotional state. "Mr. Cullinan is in an emergency board meeting," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "But he asked me to give you this." She handed Greta an envelope. Inside was a check for $1 million and a typed letter requesting her discretion and separation from Donald's life. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. "He said to tell you he's sorry," Victoria added, almost kindly, "but his position requires certain sacrifices. I'm sure you understand." Greta stood there in the soaring lobby, surrounded by the empire Donald had built, holding a check that was meant to erase her from his life. In that moment, something inside her hardened. A seed of strength she didn't know she possessed began to take root. She tore the check into tiny pieces, letting them fall like confetti on the polished floor. "Tell Donald," she said, her voice clear and strong, "that some things can't be bought." As she walked out of the building, her hand instinctively went to her still flat stomach. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. Her child would never be a secret to be buried with a check, and she would never again let anyone make her feel like she could be bought or sold. The sun was setting over the bay as she made her way home, casting long shadows across the city. In the gathering darkness, Greta began to plan her next moves, unaware that this was just the beginning of a story that would shake Silicon Valley to its foundations. Rushed to the altar. The morning sickness hit Greta like a tidal wave 2 days after she'd walked out of Cullinan Technologies. She barely made it to her bathroom, her designer work clothes crumpled on the cold tile floor as she emptied her stomach. The irony wasn't lost on her. The Prada suit she was ruining had been a gift from Donald, worn now on what would be her last day at Morgan & Stanley. Her phone had been ringing incessantly since her dramatic exit from Donald's office. Victoria Chen's number appeared with methodical regularity, like a persistent alarm she couldn't silence, but it was the latest voicemail from Donald himself that finally broke through her resolve. "Greta, please, I was a coward. Letting Victoria handle it was... I can't sleep, I can't think. Just tell me what you want, and it's yours. I'll do anything. Please, call me back." She sat on her bathroom floor, phone in hand, her finger hovering over the call button. The morning sun filtered through her small window, casting prismatic patterns on the wall, reminding her of that first night at the Opera House, when everything had seemed so full of possibility. "Anything," she whispered to herself, one hand unconsciously moving to her stomach. "Would you want this?" The decision to call him back wasn't made from love or forgiveness. It was made from a complicated mixture of practical necessity and a deep-seated belief that every child deserved to know their father. The call was brief, her voice steady despite her churning stomach. "My apartment. 7 tonight. Come alone." Donald arrived exactly at 7, looking simultaneously powerful and vulnerable in a casual black sweater that probably cost more than her monthly rent. He'd lost weight in the weeks since she'd last seen him, and there were shadows under his eyes that even his wealth couldn't conceal. "You're pregnant," he said before she could speak, his keen eyes taking in the subtle changes in her appearance, the glass of ginger ale on her coffee table, the bottle of prenatal vitamins she'd forgotten to hide. Greta sat down carefully on her worn sofa, maintaining distance between them. "Yes." From that night, it wasn't a question. Yes. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken accusations and apologies. Donald paced her small living room, running his hands through his hair in that familiar gesture of agitation she'd once found endearing. "Marry me," he said suddenly, turning to face her. Greta laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Is that your solution? Write a check, and when that doesn't work, offer a ring." "No, listen." He knelt before her, taking her hands in his despite her attempt to pull away. "I love you. I've loved you since that first night when you argued with me about cryptocurrency. Everything that's happened, I've handled it all wrong. But this," he placed one hand gently on her stomach, "this is a gift we don't deserve, but one I want more than anything." "You were drunk," she said quietly. "You hurt me." "I know." His voice cracked. "I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Both of you." What followed was a whirlwind that left Greta feeling simultaneously swept along and strangely detached. Donald's PR machine sprang into action, crafting a narrative of a passionate love story, culminating in a fairy tale wedding. Victoria Chen, ever present, orchestrated every detail with surgical precision. The engagement ring appeared the next day, a flawless 10-carat diamond that felt more like a shackle than a symbol of love. The prenuptial agreement arrived with it, a thick document that Donald immediately tore up. "No prenup," he declared. "I want you to know this is real." Victoria's face tightened at this announcement, but she said nothing, her fingers flying over her tablet as she adjusted plans accordingly. The wedding was scheduled for 3 weeks later. "Before you start showing," Victoria explained with her trademark efficiency. "We'll position it as a whirlwind romance, not a pregnancy." Greta watched the preparations unfold like a spectator in her own life. The venue was secured, the San Francisco Symphony Hall. The dress was designed, a custom Vera Wang that carefully concealed any hint of her condition. The guest list was curated, a who's who of Silicon Valley elite mixed with enough of Greta's friends and colleagues to maintain the illusion of equality. Her mother's absence felt like a physical ache during the preparations. She would have seen through all of this, would have taken one look at Donald's passionate declarations and Victoria's careful management and known exactly what to say. Instead, Greta had to rely on her own instincts, which seemed to be screaming at her even as she moved forward with the plans. The media frenzy was intense. "Silicon Valley's power couple makes it official," screamed the headlines. Speculation about the rushed timeline ran rampant, but Victoria's team managed the narrative masterfully, spinning tales of passion too strong to deny. Donald was attentive throughout it all, almost desperately so. He showered her with gifts, flew in her favorite authors for private readings, had her apartment packed up, and moved her into his mansion despite her protests. But there were moments, brief flashes when he thought she wasn't looking, where she caught him staring at her with something like panic in his eyes. The night before the wedding, he threw a lavish rehearsal dinner at the Ritz-Carlton. San Francisco's elite gathered to toast the couple, though Greta noted the calculating looks, the whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. "They're just jealous," Donald assured her, his hand possessive on her lower back. You're everything they wish they could be. But it was Victoria's toast that stayed with Greta, the words dripping with hidden meaning, to new beginnings and the unexpected turns life takes. May you both get exactly what you deserve. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, a perfect San Francisco autumn morning. The symphony hall had been transformed into a fantasy of white flowers and crystal, no expense spared to create the perfect setting for what the press was calling the wedding of the decade. In the bridal suite, surrounded by professional makeup artists and hairdressers, Greta felt strangely calm. The morning sickness had subsided just enough for her to maintain her composure, though she'd barely touched the elaborate breakfast spread Victoria had arranged. "The prenatal vitamins are in your clutch," Victoria informed her, materializing like a particularly efficient ghost. "Try not to throw up during the ceremony. The photographers have been instructed to focus on your left side. It's more photogenic." Greta met her eyes in the mirror. "Why do you hate me, Victoria?" For a moment, something like genuine emotion flickered across Victoria's perfect features. "I don't hate you. I've just seen this story before. Different actress, same play." She adjusted Greta's veil with precise movements. "Though I'll admit, you've played it better than most." Before Greta could respond, the door opened and the bridesmaids flooded in, a carefully selected mix of her real friends and socially appropriate additions. The moment for honesty passed, replaced by the orchestrated chaos of final preparations. The ceremony itself felt like an out-of-body experience. Greta floated down the aisle on a cloud of Vera Wang silk, her father's arm trembling slightly beneath her hand. Donald waited at the altar, handsome enough to take her breath away, his blue eyes suspiciously bright as she approached. Their vows were traditional, though Donald had insisted on adding a personal touch. "I choose you, today and every day, to be my partner in all things. Your dreams are my dreams. Your future is my future." The words should have been beautiful. They would look perfect in the press coverage. But all Greta could think about was the night that had led them here, and the child growing beneath her designer gown. The reception was a blur of faces and congratulations, of carefully orchestrated photo opportunities and toasts that seemed more appropriate for a merger than a marriage. Donald kept her close, his hand always somewhere on her body, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. It was during their first dance that he whispered, "I'll make you happy. I promise. Whatever it takes." Greta looked up at him, at this man who had swept into her life like a storm and rearranged everything in his wake. "Can you make yourself happy, Donald?" The question seemed to startle him, but before he could respond, Victoria appeared to remind them it was time to cut the cake. The moment passed, lost in the carefully choreographed sequence of reception events. They left for their honeymoon that night, a private island in the Maldives that Donald had bought specifically for the occasion. As their private jet took off into the darkness, Greta watched San Francisco disappear beneath them. She thought about the child growing inside her, about the man sleeping in the seat beside her, about the life she'd had just months ago when she was simply an ambitious young analyst with dreams of her own. Victoria's parting words echoed in her mind. The prenup might be torn up, but there are other ways to protect assets. Remember that. As the plane carried them toward their supposedly perfect future, Greta placed a hand on her stomach and made a silent promise to her child. Whatever happens, you will know love. Real love, not this elaborate performance we've created. Donald stirred in his sleep, reaching for her hand even in his dreams. She let him take it, wondering if somewhere beneath all the complications and manipulations, beneath the guilt and the ambition and the fear, there might still be something worth saving. But as the city lights faded into the distance, a small voice in her head whispered that this was only the beginning of a much longer, more complicated story than anyone had planned. The first signs of trouble. The Maldives honeymoon lasted exactly 3 days before the first cracks appeared in their carefully constructed facade. It began with a simple phone call, Victoria Chen's name lighting up Donald's phone during what was supposed to be a romantic sunrise breakfast on their private beach. "Don't answer it," Greta said softly, watching the way Donald's hand twitched toward the device. The morning sickness had finally given her a brief reprieve, and she'd been looking forward to actually enjoying the elaborate spread before them. "It could be important," Donald replied, already reaching for the phone. "Victoria wouldn't call if it wasn't crucial." The next hour was spent with Donald pacing their luxury villa, discussing stock fluctuations and board member concerns, while Greta sat alone on the beach, watching their untouched breakfast grow warm in the tropical sun. It would become a pattern she'd grow painfully familiar with over the coming months. They returned to San Francisco earlier than planned, Donald citing a brewing crisis at Cullinan Technologies. The press spun it as the dedication of a passionate CEO. "Even paradise can't keep Cullinan from innovation," read the headlines. Only Greta saw the relief in Donald's eyes when they boarded the private jet home, as if the fantasy of their romance was easier to maintain in the real world of business meetings and corporate protocols. Their first week as a married couple set the tone for what was to come. Donald insisted Greta quit her job at Morgan & Stanley, citing concern for her pregnancy. "You need to rest," he argued, his tone brooking no disagreement. "We have more than enough money. Let me take care of you." The argument that followed was their first real fight as a married couple. Greta stood her ground, insisting on maintaining her career. "My mother raised me to be independent," she said firmly. "I won't be a trophy wife." Donald's response was subtle but effective. The next day, her supervisor at Morgan & Stanley called her in for a meeting. "We feel it would be best for all parties if you took an extended leave," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "The potential conflicts of interest, given your new position." Later, Greta would learn that Cullinan Technologies had quietly acquired a significant stake in Morgan & Stanley's Asian operations that same morning. The message was clear. Her independence had limits, and Donald's influence did not. The pregnancy progressed, and with it came increasing restrictions on Greta's movements. Donald hired a full-time security team, citing concerns about media attention and her safety. A personal chef was brought in to ensure proper nutrition. A top obstetrician was placed on retainer, making house calls to avoid Greta having to visit a public hospital. "It's all for the baby," Donald would say whenever she protested, his hand possessive on her growing belly. "Nothing is too good for our child." Victoria Chen remained a constant presence, now installed in a home office within the mansion to better coordinate schedules. She maintained a careful professional distance, but Greta often caught her watching with that same calculating expression from their first meeting. The transformation of Donald's behavior was so gradual that Greta almost didn't notice it at first. The passionate man who'd torn up their prenup was replaced by someone who questioned every purchase on her credit cards. Her phone began to malfunction, requiring a company-issued replacement that Greta later discovered was loaded with tracking software. Her old friends' calls went mysteriously unanswered, their messages delayed or lost entirely. One particular incident stood out in Greta's memory. She had arranged to meet Sophie, her closest friend from Morgan & Stanley, for lunch at their favorite cafe. As she was leaving, Donald appeared in the foyer. "I've arranged for lunch to be served here," he said, his tone casual, but his eyes intense. "Victoria mentioned you weren't feeling well this morning. Best not to risk anything." "I feel fine," Greta protested, "and I haven't seen Sophie in weeks." "Sophie understands," Donald replied, and something in his voice made Greta's blood run cold. After all, She's quite happy in her new position at our Singapore office." The revelation that her friend had been effectively exiled hit Greta hard. She spent the afternoon in their library, one hand on her growing belly, the other clutching her grandmother's pearls, now the only piece of jewelry she owned that hadn't come from Donald. The prenatal appointments became another battleground. Donald insisted on attending each one, his presence both supportive and suffocating. He asked endless questions about the baby's development, obsessing over every detail, while somehow managing to talk over Greta whenever she tried to express her own concerns or preferences. "We want to know everything possible about our son," he said during one particularly tense appointment. "We don't know it's a boy," Greta corrected him. "I thought we agreed to wait and be surprised." Donald's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "A Cullinan firstborn is always a son. It's tradition." The nursery became his obsession. An entire wing of the mansion was renovated, cost no object. The finest European furniture was imported, the walls hand-painted by artists flown in from Florence. Everything was done in shades of blue and silver, colors for a boy. When Greta suggested adding some softer, more gender-neutral tones, Donald's reaction was surprisingly intense. "This is how it's done in my family," he snapped. "My father designed my nursery the same way. His father before him. Tradition matters, Greta." It was the first time she'd seen his carefully controlled facade crack since their wedding. The glimpse of something darker beneath his polished surface reminded her uncomfortably of that night at the charity ball, when alcohol had stripped away his veneer of perfection. Victoria, ever present, took note of the interaction. That evening, Greta overheard her on the phone. "Yes, she's becoming more difficult. No, he's handling it. The prenup situation is being addressed through other means." The mounting tensions came to a head during a dinner party Donald insisted on hosting for his board members. Greta, now 5 months pregnant, had spent the day battling morning sickness that had stubbornly refused to be confined to mornings. Still, she dressed carefully in a designer maternity gown, determined to maintain some semblance of normalcy. The conversation over dinner centered on Cullinan Technologies' latest acquisition, a promising AI startup that specialized in predictive behavior analysis. Greta, whose financial background gave her unique insights into the deal structure, offered what she thought was a pertinent observation about the valuation metrics. The table fell silent. Donald's hand tightened on his wineglass, his knuckles white. "Darling," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "perhaps you'd be more comfortable resting upstairs? The baby needs your energy more than we need your financial advice." The dismissal was clear, as was the message to everyone present. Mrs. Cullinan's role did not include involvement in business matters. Greta sat through the rest of dinner in silence, watching the way the board members carefully avoided meeting her eyes. Later that night, after the guests had left, Donald came to their bedroom with a peace offering, a Cartier bracelet in a signature red box. "I'm sorry," he said, kissing her temple. "I just worry about you getting overexcited. It's not good for the baby." Greta looked at the bracelet, another beautiful cage to add to her collection. "The baby isn't your only concern," she said quietly. "You're afraid I'll say something that undermines your authority." "Don't be ridiculous," Donald scoffed, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Everything I do is for you and our child. Speaking of which..." He pulled out some papers from his briefcase. "These just need your signature. Some routine legal matters regarding the baby's trust fund." Greta took the papers, but didn't open them. "I'll have my lawyer review them first." "Your lawyer?" Donald's laugh held no humor. "Darling, our lawyers are the same. Everything is handled by the company's legal team now. It's simpler that way." The papers remained unsigned, joining a growing stack in Greta's private desk, documents she'd begun secretly copying and sending to a post office box rented under her maiden name. She didn't know why she felt the need for such precautions, but some instinct told her to maintain at least this small piece of independence. As she lay awake that night, listening to Donald's steady breathing beside her, Greta ran through the events of the past months like a balance sheet, trying to pinpoint exactly when things had begun to go wrong. Was it the night of the charity ball, the rushed wedding, or had the seeds been planted even earlier in those first intoxicating days when his power and charm had seemed like attributes rather than weapons? The baby kicked, a strong movement that brought tears to her eyes. "We'll figure this out," she whispered, one hand protectively over her stomach. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." But as she drifted off to sleep, Victoria's words from the wedding echoed in her mind. Different actress, same play. The question that haunted her dreams was simple. What happened to the other actresses when their roles were done? Chapter 6. The day everything shattered. It began with a quiet, almost serene morning. Greta had taken to early walks in Pacific Heights, finding solace in the crisp autumn air and the rhythmic crunch of leaves beneath her shoes. The mansion was too stifling, its halls echoing with the emptiness of a life that wasn't truly hers. On this particular Saturday, she felt more determined than usual to embrace some semblance of normalcy. She dressed in simple clothes, a loose-knit sweater and maternity jeans that felt more Greta Klusner than Mrs. Cullinan. Leaving the mansion under the pretense of running errands, she ignored the watchful eyes of the security detail Donald had insisted on. She headed to Nordstrom, a place where she could blend into the crowd and remember a time when her choices weren't dictated by someone else's expectations. The department store buzzed with weekend shoppers. Families bustled through the aisles, couples debated over winter coats, and children tugged at their parents for toys. Greta wandered through the women's section, her fingers brushing over soft fabrics and simple designs. She lingered near a display of scarves, imagining how one might pair with her grandmother's pearls, those precious remnants of her past life. She was so lost in thought she didn't see him at first. "Greta!" The voice cut through her reverie like a blade. She turned, her heart skipping a beat, and there he was, Donald. But not the man she had fallen in love with, or even the one she had married. This Donald was colder, his polished exterior sharpened into something almost cruel. Beside him stood a woman Greta recognized from tabloids, Madison Blake, an Instagram influencer known for her perfectly curated life and flawless beauty. Greta's hand instinctively went to her stomach, as though shielding her unborn child from the weight of the moment. "Donald," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Madison's eyes flicked over Greta, assessing her like she was an object of curiosity rather than a person. "Is this someone you know?" Donald's face twisted into a sneer. "This is my estranged wife," he said, the words dripping with venom. "And that," he added, pointing at her stomach, "is apparently supposed to be my child." The air around them seemed to freeze. Greta's cheeks burned as shoppers slowed, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding drama. "What are you doing, Donald?" she asked, her voice low but firm. "What am I doing?" Donald's voice rose, attracting more attention. "No, Greta. The question is, what the hell are you doing? Working here, parading around like some victim. You think you're going to humiliate me?" "Humiliate you?" Greta took a step back, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "I'm trying to live my life, Donald, a life you've made nearly impossible." "Don't play innocent with me," he snapped. "You're nothing but a gold digger, and let's not pretend for a second that baby is mine." A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Greta's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You know this baby is yours," she said, her voice steel under the pressure of his accusations. "You know it, and yet you're standing here trying to destroy me because you can't face the truth of who you've become." Madison placed a perfectly manicured hand on Donald's arm, her expression somewhere between boredom and discomfort. "Maybe we should go," she murmured. "No," Donald said, his eyes blazing. "She needs to hear this." He turned back to Greta. "You think I don't know about your little plans, the lawyers, the files? Did you really think you could take me on? You're nothing without me." Greta's breath hitched, but she refused to look away. "I am everything without you," she said, her voice rising above the murmurs of the crowd. "I was something before you, and I will be something long after you're gone." For a moment they simply stared at each other, the weight of their shared history and unspoken betrayals pressing between them. Then Donald laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You're delusional," he said, grabbing Madison's hand. "Come on, we're done here." As they walked away, Greta stood rooted to the spot, the heat of 100 eyes on her back. Her heart pounded, her breath shallow. Slowly, she became aware of a store manager approaching, his expression one of professional concern. "Ma'am," he began cautiously, "are you all right? Do you need—" "I'm fine," she interrupted, her voice sharper than intended. She straightened her posture, lifted her chin, and forced herself to meet his gaze. "Thank you." The rest of the day passed in a haze. Greta didn't remember leaving the store or hailing a ride back to her apartment. She didn't remember unlocking the door or collapsing onto the couch, but she remembered the words. "You're nothing without me." They echoed in her mind, taunting her, intertwining with memories of their early days, their first debate, their first kiss, their whispered promises of forever. She thought of her child, growing inside her, and the life she wanted to build. Not for Donald, not for anyone else, for herself. By the time the sun set, Greta had made a decision. She pulled out her laptop, her fingers trembling as they hovered over the keyboard. The folder she had been compiling for months, documents, emails, financial statements, was ready. It was time to act. She sent the file to 3 trusted contacts: Sophie, her former lawyer, and a journalist known for exposing corruption among Silicon Valley elites. Then she drafted a single sentence and attached it to the file. The truth should never be hidden, no matter how powerful the one hiding it. She hit send, then closed the laptop with a finality that felt like closing the door on a chapter of her life. Greta didn't know what the next day would bring. She didn't know how Donald would react, or what battles lay ahead. But for the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope. As she lay in bed that night, her hand resting on her stomach, she whispered to her unborn child, "We're going to be okay. I promise." And for the first time in a long time, she believed it. Chapter 7. Cast into Darkness. The fall from Grace was swift, brutal, and meticulously orchestrated. Greta had underestimated the lengths to which Donald would go to preserve his reputation. In the days following the Nordstrom debacle, her life unraveled at a pace she hadn't thought possible. Her job at Morgan & Stanley, already tenuous after Donald's manipulations, officially ended with a curt email from HR. No explanation was given, but Greta didn't need one. Every application she sent to other firms in San Francisco went unanswered, her calls politely redirected or outright ignored. Her once promising career in finance was over, collateral damage in Donald's ruthless war to erase her from his life. The financial pressure began immediately. Her joint accounts with Donald, accounts he had insisted on creating for their future family, were frozen, citing pending legal review. Her personal savings, the modest nest egg she'd built before meeting him, mysteriously vanished. The bank claimed the funds were seized in a lawsuit Greta had no knowledge of. Desperate for answers, she contacted a lawyer, only to be told the retainer fee was higher than she could afford. The lawyer's tone was sympathetic but firm. "You're fighting one of the wealthiest men in the country. This won't be cheap or easy." Her landlord, once understanding of her situation, changed his tune when the rent check bounced. 2 weeks later, she was evicted, her belongings left on the curb, like the remnants of a life she no longer recognized. Greta reached out to friends, hoping for support or even just a place to stay. But most of them, intimidated by Donald's power and influence, turned her away. "You know how it is," one former colleague said, her voice filled with regret. "If I help you, I could lose my job too." The final blow came when Sophie, her closest friend, stopped returning her calls altogether. Greta saw the writing on the wall. She was on her own. The shelter. By the time Greta arrived at the women's shelter, her pride had been stripped away. She carried a single duffel bag, packed hastily from the curb where her possessions had been discarded. Her maternity clothes, now too small for her growing belly, were stuffed into the bag alongside a few sentimental items. Her grandmother's pearls, a dog-eared copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, and a framed photo of her late mother. The shelter was a modest building on the outskirts of the city, its exterior worn but clean. Inside, it smelled faintly of disinfectant and desperation. Greta hesitated at the front desk, feeling the weight of her circumstances press down on her. The woman behind the desk smiled kindly, though her eyes betrayed exhaustion. "First time here?" she asked. Greta nodded, her throat too tight to speak. "Don't worry, love. We'll take care of you." The woman handed her a clipboard with intake forms. "Name, due date, any medical conditions we should know about. Take your time." As Greta filled out the forms, her hands shook. She couldn't believe this was her life now. No home, no job, no friends. The baby kicked, a small but insistent reminder of the life growing inside her. She placed a protective hand over her belly and took a deep breath. For the first few nights, Greta kept to herself. The shelter was a strange, chaotic place filled with women and children whose stories she didn't know but could feel in the air around them. Some women were friendly, offering smiles or small talk. Others were guarded, their eyes darting around as if expecting danger at any moment. The accommodations were sparse, a twin bed in a shared room, communal bathrooms with flickering lights, and a cafeteria that served simple, bland meals. But it was safe, and for that Greta was grateful. Daily struggles. Greta's days became a routine of survival. She woke early, her back aching from the cheap mattress, and joined the other women in the cafeteria for breakfast, oatmeal and black coffee. Afterward, she attended job workshops offered by the shelter, though her growing belly and tarnished reputation made finding work nearly impossible. The afternoons were spent at food banks and clinics. She waited in long lines for donated prenatal vitamins, baby clothes and other essentials. The shame she felt was overwhelming at first, but the kindness of strangers slowly softened the sting. At night, she read aloud to her unborn child, using the worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. "We'll get through this," she whispered after each chapter, her voice breaking but determined. "I promise." The other women at the shelter began to notice Greta's quiet resilience. A few reached out, sharing their own stories of loss and survival. One woman, an older mother named Carla, took Greta under her wing. "You're stronger than you think," Carla said one evening as they folded laundry together. "I've seen women come through here and rebuild their lives from nothing. You can do it too." But rebuilding felt impossible. Every attempt Greta made to regain, her footing was met with another obstacle. Donald's influence stretched farther than she'd imagined. Potential employers seemed to know her name before she introduced herself. One hiring manager even muttered, "We've been warned about you," before ending the interview. A glimmer of hope. Amid the darkness, small moments of hope began to surface. The shelter provided free counseling, and Greta reluctantly agreed to attend. Her counselor, a patient woman named Anita, helped her process the trauma she had been carrying since the night everything fell apart. "You're not just a victim, Greta," Anita said during one session. "You're a survivor, and survivors find a way." The words stuck with Greta, giving her a flicker of determination she hadn't felt in weeks. She began volunteering at the shelter, helping other women with their resumes and sharing tips from her own experience in finance. Slowly, she found purpose in helping others, even as her own life remained uncertain. The baby became her anchor. Every kick, every flutter reminded her of the life she was fighting for. She started keeping a journal, documenting her hopes and fears for her child. "You'll grow up strong," she wrote one night, tears smudging the ink, "stronger than me." The turning point. One evening, while sorting through donated clothing, Greta overheard two shelter workers discussing a legal aid clinic that specialized in helping women like her. "They go after guys like Cullinan," one of them said, her voice low but firm. "Money doesn't scare them." Greta's heart raced. Could this be the break she needed? The next morning, she called the clinic. The receptionist was polite but cautious. "We've dealt with Cullinan Technologies before," she said. "It won't be easy, but if you're willing to fight, we'll fight with you." For the first time in months, Greta felt a spark of hope. She scheduled a consultation and spent the next week gathering every scrap of evidence she had. Emails, text messages, financial documents she had hidden before leaving Donald's mansion. When the day of the consultation arrived, Greta walked into the clinic with her head held high. The lawyer assigned to her case, a sharp-eyed woman named Elena, listened intently as Greta recounted everything. Donald's manipulation, the frozen accounts, the smear campaign that had destroyed her career. "You've been through hell," Elena said when Greta finished, "but you're still standing. That's more than most people can say." Greta smiled faintly, her hand resting on her belly. "I have to be. For my child." Eleanor nodded. "We'll start with the accounts. If we can prove fraud or coercion, we might be able to recover some of your money. As for the defamation, that's going to be trickier but not impossible." It wasn't a guarantee, but it was something. And for Greta, something was enough. A new resolve. That night, back at the shelter, Greta sat by the window and stared at the city lights in the distance. She thought about everything she had lost, her career, her home, her friends, and everything she still had to fight for. The baby kicked, a strong and steady movement that felt like encouragement. "We'll make it," she whispered, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "I don't know how yet, but we will." The road ahead was uncertain, filled with battles she didn't yet know how to fight. But Greta was no longer the woman who had been blindsided by Donald's betrayal. She was stronger now, forged by the trials she had endured. And as she closed her eyes that night, her hand resting on her belly, Greta allowed herself to dream of a future where she and her child would finally be free. Chapter 8. A Guardian Angel. The shelter's fluorescent lights flickered faintly in the cramped clinic, where women sat patiently, waiting for their turn with the visiting medical volunteers. Greta was seated on one of the worn chairs, her hands resting protectively on her rounded belly. She was now 7 months along, her once delicate movements now replaced by the unmistakable presence of the life growing within her. The baby's kicks had become her constant source of strength, a reminder that no matter how dire her situation seemed, she had something worth fighting for. That morning, she'd felt particularly low. A rejection letter from yet another potential employer sat folded in her pocket, a stark reminder of how thoroughly Donald had blacklisted her. Greta Klusner. The warm, melodic voice cut through her thoughts, and she looked up. Standing in the doorway was a woman in her mid-30s, with soft brown skin, dark, intelligent eyes, and an aura of calm confidence. Her white coat bore the name Dr. Sarah Patel. Greta stood, wincing slightly as her back protested the motion. Dr. Patel noticed and gestured gently. "Take your time. Let's make sure you're comfortable." The small examination room was stark, its medical equipment functional but outdated. Greta climbed onto the exam table, feeling the cool paper crinkle beneath her. Dr. Patel moved with practiced ease, setting up her tools and reviewing Greta's chart. "First pregnancy?" Dr. Patel asked with a kind smile. Greta nodded. "Yes, it's been challenging." "I can imagine," Dr. Patel said, her tone empathetic but professional. "Any pain, bleeding, concerns?" "Mostly back pain and exhaustion," Greta admitted. "The shelter's beds aren't exactly ideal, but I'm managing." As the exam progressed, Dr. Patel asked more questions, her tone gentle yet probing. Greta found herself sharing more than she'd intended, about the stress, the isolation, and the overwhelming fear of what lay ahead. Dr. Patel listened intently, her expression softening with every word. When the exam was finished, Dr. Patel pulled up a chair and sat across from Greta. "Your baby is doing well," she said reassuringly. "Strong heartbeat, good growth. But you—" She paused, her voice careful. "You're carrying more than just a baby, Greta. You're carrying a lot of emotional weight." Greta looked away, her hands tightening over her belly. "I don't have a choice." "You always have a choice," Dr. Patel said firmly, "and I want to help you find it." Recognizing the signs over the next few weeks, Dr. Patel made a point of checking in with Greta during her volunteer shifts. They spoke about more than just prenatal care, about Greta's life before the shelter, her dreams for the future, and the shadow Donald Cullinan cast over everything. Dr. Patel's concern grew as she pieced together Greta's story. The financial sabotage, the isolation, the smear campaign. It was clear to her that Greta was not just a victim of circumstance, but of deliberate, calculated psychological abuse. "Have you ever spoken to someone about what you've been through?" Dr. Patel asked one afternoon, after Greta had shared the details of Donald's campaign to ruin her. "I've tried," Greta admitted, "but lawyers are expensive, and no one wants to go up against him. He's untouchable." Dr. Patel's dark eyes flashed with determination. "No one is untouchable." Meeting Maya Rodriguez. The next week, Dr. Patel returned to the shelter with a business card in hand. She found Greta in the cafeteria helping Carla distribute donated meals. "Greta," Dr. Patel said, her voice firm but encouraging. "There's someone I want you to meet. Her name is Maya Rodriguez. She's a civil rights attorney, and she specializes in cases like yours." Greta hesitated, wiping her hands on a towel. "Cases like mine?" "Cases where powerful men think they can control women's lives," Dr. Patel said bluntly. "Maya has taken on CEOs, politicians, even a media mogul. And she's won. She's fearless, and she doesn't back down." Greta stared at the card, the embossed letters almost mocking in their perfection. Maya Rodriguez, civil rights attorney. Could she really trust someone to stand up to Donald? "She won't take this lightly," Dr. Patel added, as if reading Greta's thoughts. "But she'll need your full honesty and your full cooperation. If you're ready to fight, she'll fight with you." Greta took the card, her hands trembling. "I'll call her." The first meeting. 2 days later, Greta sat in the modest but professional office of Maya Rodriguez. The walls were lined with shelves of legal books, and the air smelled faintly of coffee and determination. Maya herself was an imposing figure, a petite woman in her early 40s with sharp features, a no-nonsense attitude, and a reputation that preceded her. "Greta," Maya said, extending a hand as Greta entered. "I've heard a lot about you." "All good, I hope." Greta replied, trying to lighten the tension. Maya didn't smile, but her eyes softened slightly. Dr. Patel speaks very highly of you. She's worried about you, and so am I. Let's talk. For the next 2 hours, Greta laid everything bare. She told Maya about Donald's charm and manipulations, the night at the gala, the whirlwind wedding, and the suffocating control that followed. She described the Nordstrom confrontation, the eviction, and the relentless blacklisting that had left her in the shelter. When she finished, Maya sat back, her sharp eyes narrowing in thought. "You've been through hell," she said simply, "and I'm going to make sure he pays for every second of it." Greta's breath caught. "You think we can win?" Maya's smile was razor-sharp. "Winning is subjective. Will we take him down completely? Probably not. Men like him are protected by layers of lawyers and PR firms. But can we expose him, recover what's rightfully yours? Absolutely." The plan Maya wasted no time. She assembled a team of investigators and legal experts, each specializing in a facet of Greta's case. The financial sabotage was the easiest to address. Donald's fingerprints were all over the frozen accounts and vanished savings. "We'll start with a public records request," Maya explained during their next meeting. "Then we'll subpoena his financial records. If he's done what I think he's done, it won't take long to prove fraud." The smear campaign posed a greater challenge. Maya's team began reaching out to Greta's former colleagues, building a case that showed a pattern of intimidation and coercion. "Some of them are scared," Maya admitted, "but fear only lasts so long. Once one person speaks out, others will follow." For Greta, the process was both empowering and terrifying. She spent hours providing testimony, reviewing documents, and reliving moments she'd tried to forget. But for the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that justice might be possible. The beginning of the end. 3 weeks after their first meeting, Maya filed a lawsuit against Donald Cullinan. The filing was a bombshell, alleging fraud, defamation, and emotional abuse. Within hours, the news broke, and Greta's name was splashed across headlines once again. This time, though, she wasn't a victim. She was a fighter. Donald's response was swift and predictable. His lawyers issued a statement denying the allegations, calling Greta's claims baseless and an attempt to exploit a public figure for personal gain. But Maya was ready. At a press conference the next day, she stood beside Greta and delivered a scathing rebuttal. "Women like Greta Klusner are not opportunists," Maya declared. "They are survivors, and we will not be silenced by threats or money." As cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions, Greta stood tall, her hand resting on her belly. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her child, for every woman who had ever been told she was powerless. And as she looked out at the sea of cameras, she knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long and grueling, but with Maya and Dr. Patel by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. Chapter 9. Gathering Storm. Donald Cullinan's every move was carefully calculated, a choreographed performance meant to distract from the brewing storm on the horizon. His relationship with Madison Blake became a spectacle, plastered across tabloids and social media. Lavish vacations, red carpet appearances, and exclusive parties showcased their glamorous life, painting a picture of a man unbothered by controversy. To the outside world, he appeared untouchable, a tech titan whose personal life was just another story for the gossip columns. But behind the scenes, Greta and Maya were working tirelessly to dismantle his facade. Each step forward required painstaking effort, but the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place. The turning point came when Maya's investigative team unearthed an alarming pattern in Donald's past relationships. 3 women, each of them strikingly similar to Greta in their intelligence, ambition, and independence, had once been involved with him. They had all experienced whirlwind romances that ended in manipulation, financial sabotage, and silencing. The team's discovery was chilling. Each woman had been forced into non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, as part of substantial settlements, their stories buried under layers of legal secrecy. These agreements were ironclad, designed to protect Donald's reputation at all costs. But Maya was undeterred. "This is the pattern we need," she told Greta during one of their late-night strategy sessions. "It's not just about what he did to you. It's about what he's been doing for years. If we can convince one of these women to break their silence, it could change everything." The process of reaching out to the women was delicate. Maya's team approached each one cautiously, respecting their privacy while making it clear that their testimony could be the key to exposing Donald's abusive behavior. At first, all three refused, citing fears of retaliation and the binding nature of their NDAs. Meanwhile, Greta's health began to deteriorate under the strain of the legal battle and the relentless stress of Donald's public attacks. Dr. Patel documented every detail, from Greta's rising blood pressure to her episodes of debilitating fatigue. "You need to take care of yourself, Doctor," Patel urged during one of her checkups. "The baby is strong, but you can't keep pushing yourself like this." Greta nodded, though the exhaustion in her eyes betrayed her growing doubts. "I don't have a choice," she replied. "If I stop now, he wins." Dr. Patel wasn't just concerned with Greta's physical health, she meticulously documented the pregnancy timeline, ensuring that any attempts by Donald to deny paternity would be met with irrefutable evidence. Every ultrasound, every lab result, and every note in Greta's medical file became part of the case, building a comprehensive picture of her truth. The breakthrough came when one of the women, a former journalist named Claire, agreed to meet with Maya in secret. Over coffee in a nondescript cafe, she shared her story, a chilling mirror of Greta's experience. Donald had charmed her, controlled her, and ultimately destroyed her career when she tried to leave him. "I thought I could put it behind me," Claire admitted, her voice shaking. "But seeing what he's done to Greta, I can't stay silent anymore." Claire's testimony became the foundation of their case, a powerful narrative that exposed Donald's calculated pattern of abuse. It emboldened the other two women, who eventually agreed to contribute statements under the condition of anonymity. As Maya worked to solidify the legal strategy, Donald's public attacks grew more vicious. His lawyers issued statements accusing Greta of fabricating her claims, while Madison made veiled comments on social media about bitter exes who can't move on. But Greta refused to be intimidated. Each new attack only strengthened her resolve. "He thinks he can control everything," she told Maya one evening. "But this time, he's wrong." By the end of the chapter, the storm was no longer gathering, it was poised to break. With Maya's relentless pursuit of justice, Dr. Patel's unwavering support, and the courage of the women who had come forward, Greta's case was ready to move forward. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, the scales seemed to be tipping in her favor. The truth, long buried under Donald's wealth and power, was finally beginning to emerge. Chapter 10. The DNA Truth. Isabella Rose Klusner came into the world on a chilly December morning, her cries filling the delivery room like the triumphant sound of a battle won. Greta, exhausted but overwhelmed with love, held her daughter close, marveling at her tiny fingers and the soft whirls of dark hair that matched Donald's. "She's perfect," Dr. Patel said, smiling as she handed Isabella over after her first checkup. "Strong lungs, healthy weight. You did beautifully, Greta." Tears streamed down Greta's face as she kissed her daughter's forehead. In that moment, the months of fear and uncertainty seemed to fade. Isabella was here, a living, breathing reminder of Greta's strength and resilience. But the battle wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. The DNA test. 2 days after Isabella's birth, Greta sat in the shelter's small clinic, holding her newborn close as a nurse swabbed the inside of her mouth and then Isabella's. The DNA test, ordered by Maya as part of their legal strategy, would provide irrefutable proof of paternity. "This is just a formality," Maya had told Greta when they first discussed it. "But it's crucial. Donald's already tried to deny the pregnancy. If he disputes paternity, we need hard evidence to shut him down immediately." The results arrived a week later. Maya called Greta to her office, her expression unreadable as she handed over the envelope. Greta opened it with trembling hands, her heart pounding in her chest. The document was clear, a 99.99% probability that Donald Cullinan was Isabella's biological father. Greta's breath caught. She looked down at her sleeping daughter, her tiny chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. "There's no denying it now," she whispered. Maya nodded, her sharp eyes focused. "This is a win, but we need to be strategic about how we use it. Right now, Isabella's existence is your strongest card. If we play it too soon, Donald's team will spin it, and the media will have a field day." Greta frowned. "So what do we do?" "We wait," Maya said firmly. "Donald's pattern is to deny and deflect. If we reveal the truth now, he'll use his PR machine to paint you as a liar who trapped him with a baby. But if we wait until the court case, when he's under oath and the evidence is presented as part of a larger narrative, he won't have anywhere to hide." It was a calculated move, one that required patience Greta wasn't sure she had. But she trusted Maya, whose determination had already brought them further than Greta ever thought possible. Donald's reaction. In the weeks following Isabella's birth, Donald continued to flaunt his relationship with Madison. The tabloids filled with stories about their extravagant vacations and rumored engagement. Greta knew it was all a performance, a way for Donald to assert control and distract from the growing legal case against him. But something had shifted. Donald's lawyers began subtly probing about the baby, asking questions that suggested he was growing uneasy. Greta could sense the cracks forming in his facade. "He knows," Maya said during one of their strategy meetings. "He's trying to figure out what you're holding back. We need to keep him guessing." Dr. Patel played her part as well, ensuring that every medical document related to Isabella's birth and Greta's pregnancy was meticulously preserved. She even included notes about the emotional toll Donald's actions had taken on Greta, framing it as evidence of the abuse Greta had endured. Isabella's place in the case, Maya's strategy, was as bold as it was methodical. Isabella was not just Greta's daughter. She was a symbol of the life Donald had tried to erase. Maya planned to use her existence as a cornerstone of their case, but only when the time was right. "We'll tie it all together," Maya explained, spreading documents across her desk. "The financial abuse, the smear campaign, the psychological manipulation, and now Isabella. We'll show that Donald not only tried to destroy Greta's life, but also attempted to erase his responsibility for their child. It's a narrative the courts won't be able to ignore." But waiting was agonizing for Greta. Every day she saw Donald's name in the headlines, his power seemingly unshaken, while she struggled to rebuild her life from the ground up. She spent sleepless nights feeding Isabella and wondering if she had made the right choice to hold back the truth. "It's hard," Dr. Patel said during one of their regular visits. "But Maya's right. Timing is everything. You're not just fighting for yourself, you're fighting for Isabella's future." Greta nodded, her resolve strengthening with every passing day. The first signs of change. The shift came slowly, like the first drops of rain before a storm. Maya's legal team began to leak strategic pieces of evidence to the press, small but damning details about Donald's financial dealings and his pattern of controlling behavior. At the same time, they made sure the focus remained on Greta's fight for justice, painting her as a mother determined to protect her child. Donald's lawyers responded with more denials, but the cracks in his armor were beginning to show. Anonymous sources within his company started coming forward, corroborating Greta's claims of his manipulative tactics. Meanwhile, Greta focused on raising Isabella, finding strength in the quiet moments with her daughter. Each smile, each tiny grasp of her finger reminded her why she was fighting. "You're my miracle," she whispered one night, rocking Isabella to sleep. "And I promise you, I won't let him take anything else from us." The final piece. As the court date approached, Maya revealed the final piece of her strategy, a subpoena for Donald to submit his own DNA for comparison. "He won't have a choice," Maya explained. "If he refuses, it'll look like an admission of guilt. If he complies, the results will confirm what we already know. Either way, we win." Greta nodded, the weight of the moment settling over her. The truth was undeniable, and soon the world would know it too. Isabella's existence was no longer just a secret weapon. She was the truth that Donald couldn't escape, a symbol of the justice Greta was determined to achieve. As Greta looked at her daughter, she felt a surge of hope. The storm was far from over, but for the first time she could see the light breaking through the clouds. Chapter 11. Corporate Warfare. While Donald Cullinan continued to flaunt his wealth and influence in the public eye, Maya Rodriguez and her team worked tirelessly in the shadows, piecing together a case that would do far more than expose his personal misconduct. The deeper they dug into his empire, the more they uncovered a web of deceit and corruption that stretched across Silicon Valley. Unveiling the hidden crimes. Maya's team began their investigation with a simple but bold question. What else is Donald hiding? They combed through public records, financial disclosures, and internal documents obtained from whistleblowers. What emerged was a pattern of illegal activities that went beyond the personal vendettas he waged against women like Greta. One of the first red flags was a series of suspicious stock trades tied to Cullinan Technologies. Over the years, Donald had made perfectly timed decisions to buy or sell shares in companies just before major announcements, mergers, product launches, regulatory approvals. On paper, the trades seemed like savvy business moves, but Maya's team suspected otherwise. Anonymous sources within the company confirmed their suspicions. "He has inside knowledge," one former executive confided in a recorded interview. "Donald orchestrates deals months in advance and uses that information to manipulate the market. He's made billions from it." The next revelation was even more damning: evidence of corporate espionage. Maya's team uncovered encrypted communications between Cullinan Technologies and shadowy third-party firms specializing in hacking and data theft. These firms had allegedly been hired to spy on competitors, stealing trade secrets and intellectual property to keep Cullinan Technologies ahead in the race for innovation. "This isn't just a civil case anymore," Maya said during a late-night strategy meeting. "This is criminal. If we play this right, we can bring federal investigators into the mix." Victoria Chen's conscience. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source: Victoria Chen. Once Donald's most loyal lieutenant, she had been the architect of many of his schemes, including the campaign to discredit Greta. But as Maya's investigation gained traction, Victoria began to feel the weight of her complicity. Maya received an anonymous email late one evening. The sender claimed to have inside knowledge of Cullinan Technologies' operations and offered to meet in person. Maya, cautious but intrigued, agreed to a meeting in a public park. When Victoria Chen stepped out of the shadows, Maya was taken aback. She had expected a low-level employee, not Donald's right-hand woman. "I can't do this anymore," Victoria said, her voice trembling. "I've spent years cleaning up Donald's messes, lying for him, protecting him, but what he's done to Greta, it's too far." Victoria provided Maya with a trove of evidence, encrypted emails, financial records, and internal memos, detailing Donald's involvement in insider trading and corporate espionage. She also confirmed the existence of NDAs silencing former employees and victims, as well as payments to offshore accounts designed to evade scrutiny. "Why are you doing this?" Maya asked, her tone careful. Victoria's gaze hardened. "Because I can't look at myself in the mirror anymore, and because I know what he'll do to me if I stay." Building the case. With Victoria's testimony and the evidence she provided, Maya's team was able to create a detailed timeline of Donald's illegal activities. Each piece of the puzzle fit perfectly, painting a picture of a man who had built his empire not through genius or innovation, but through calculated deceit and exploitation. Maya's strategy was twofold. 1. Expose Donald publicly. Leaking key pieces of evidence to the press would shift public opinion and make it harder for Donald to hide behind his PR machine. 2. Trigger a federal investigation. By presenting the evidence to regulators and law enforcement, Maya aimed to bring criminal charges against Donald, ensuring that his empire would crumble from within. "We're not just fighting for Greta anymore," Maya told her team. "We're fighting for everyone Donald has hurt, everyone he's silenced, and everyone who thinks people like him are untouchable." The fallout begins. When the first article broke in a major financial publication, it was like a bomb had detonated in Silicon Valley. The headline read, "Tech Titan Donald Cullinan accused of insider trading and espionage." The article detailed Maya's findings, citing anonymous whistleblowers and leaked documents. Within hours, the story went viral, dominating news cycles and sparking outrage across the industry. Donald's immediate response was predictable. His lawyers issued a statement denying the allegations, calling them baseless attacks orchestrated by disgruntled former employees and opportunistic lawyers. But the damage was done. Investors began pulling out, and Cullinan Technologies' stock plummeted. Federal agencies announced they were opening investigations into the allegations. The Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, launched a probe into the insider trading claims, while the FBI began looking into the corporate espionage allegations. For the first time, Donald was on the defensive. Greta's role. Though the focus of the case had expanded beyond her personal battle, Greta remained at the heart of it all. Maya made sure of that. "Donald underestimated you," Maya told Greta during a quiet moment in her office. "He thought he could destroy you and move on, but now you're the reason his entire empire is unraveling." Greta felt a mix of pride and fear. The fight was far from over, and she knew Donald would retaliate. But as she held Isabella in her arms, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, "for her." The turning tide. As more whistleblowers came forward, the case against Donald grew stronger. Former employees of Cullinan Technologies shared stories of workplace harassment, unethical practices, and the immense pressure to remain silent. Maya's team worked around the clock, coordinating with federal investigators and preparing for the court battle that would define Greta's future. Dr. Patel continued to support Greta, documenting the physical and emotional toll the ordeal had taken on her as further evidence of Donald's abuse. The media frenzy reached a fever pitch as the public turned against Donald. Madison Blake, once a constant presence by his side, quietly disappeared from the spotlight. Rumors swirled that she had ended their relationship, further isolating Donald as his world crumbled. For the final blow, the chapter ended with a dramatic twist. A leaked recording of Donald himself discussing insider trading strategies with a trusted advisor. The recording, provided by yet another anonymous whistleblower, left no room for doubt about his guilt. For Maya, it was the final piece of the puzzle. For Greta, it was a vindication of everything she had endured. As Donald's empire teetered on the brink of collapse, Greta stood stronger than ever, ready to face whatever came next. The storm she had weathered was now sweeping Donald away, and for the first time she could see a future where she and Isabella were free from his shadow. Chapter 12. The Fall from Grace. The day began with a headline that would change everything. Donald Cullinan's empire under siege, insider trading, espionage and abuse claims surface, splashed across the front page of the Wall Street Journal. The story, meticulously researched and devastatingly detailed, laid bare the full extent of Donald's misdeeds. Maya Rodriguez's carefully crafted strategy had paid off, and the once untouchable tech magnate now stood exposed for the fraud he truly was. The article chronicled years of Donald's illegal activities, insider trading schemes that had netted him billions, corporate espionage that undermined competitors, and NDAs that silenced victims of his emotional and financial abuse. The whistleblowers, emboldened by Greta's bravery and Maya's determination, provided first-hand accounts that painted a chilling portrait of Donald's manipulative tactics. The public's reaction was swift and merciless. Social media erupted with outrage. Hashtags like #Cullinan exposed and #Justice for Greta trending worldwide. Industry leaders distanced themselves, expressing shock and disappointment at the revelations. Investors scrambled to protect their interests, triggering a massive sell-off that sent Cullinan Technologies' stock into free fall. The board's emergency meeting. Inside the sleek, glass-walled boardroom of Cullinan Technologies, the atmosphere was tense. The board of directors, all seasoned professionals who had benefited from Donald's meteoric rise, now found themselves facing a crisis that threatened to destroy the company. Donald entered the room with his usual air of confidence, but his disheveled appearance betrayed the toll the scandal was taking. His tailored suit hung loosely on his frame, and dark circles underlined his piercing blue eyes. "This is a smear campaign," he began, slamming a copy of the Wall Street Journal onto the table. "An attack orchestrated by a bitter ex-wife and a rogue attorney." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. For years they had turned a blind eye to Donald's questionable practices, rationalizing that his brilliance justified his methods, but the mounting evidence, coupled with the public backlash, left them with no choice. "We've received inquiries from the SEC and the FBI," one board member said, his voice measured but firm. "The allegations are serious, Donald. If we don't act, the entire company could go under." Donald leaned forward, his jaw tight. "I built this company. Everything you have is because of me. Do you really think you can survive without me?" Another board member cleared her throat. "That's precisely the point. The company's survival depends on distancing ourselves from you. We've scheduled a press conference to announce your resignation." The room fell silent. For a moment, Donald simply stared at them, his expression a mix of disbelief and fury. "You're firing me?" "It's the only way to contain the fallout," the chairman replied. "You can either step down voluntarily or be removed. The choice is yours." Donald's laugh was bitter and humorless. "You think this will save you? You're nothing without me." But deep down, he knew they were right. Madison's breakup. As the board prepared for damage control, Madison Blake was staging her own exit. She had always loved the spotlight, but the scrutiny brought on by Donald's scandal was too much. Reporters camped outside her luxury apartment, and social media was flooded with accusations that she had turned a blind eye to his behavior. Madison's carefully curated image as a glamorous influencer began to crack. She knew that staying with Donald would destroy her reputation, so she did what she had always done best. She pivoted. In a tear-filled press conference broadcast, live on national television, Madison announced the end of her relationship with Donald. Her voice trembled as she described the emotional abuse she had endured, framing herself as yet another victim of his manipulative charm. "I believed in him," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "But I can't stand by and support someone who has hurt so many people. I'm speaking out now because silence only enables abusers." Madison's confession, while self-serving, added another layer of credibility to the growing case against Donald. Her revelations about his controlling behavior and volatile temper resonated with the public, further tarnishing his already battered reputation. The aftermath. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Within hours of Madison's press conference, major investors in Cullinan Technologies announced their withdrawal. Government agencies escalated their investigations, raiding company offices and seizing records. The media relentlessly covered every new development, portraying Donald as the embodiment of corporate greed and unchecked power. Donald retreated to his Pacific Heights mansion, which had become a fortress of isolation. Security guards patrolled the grounds, but even they couldn't shield him from the relentless calls and emails demanding answers. His once loyal staff began resigning en masse, unwilling to go down with a sinking ship. Greta's perspective. From her modest apartment, Greta watched the events unfold with a mixture of vindication and relief. Isabella cooed softly in her arms, oblivious to the storm raging outside. Maya called with updates almost daily, her voice filled with the satisfaction of a battle well fought. "The tide is turning, Greta," she said after Madison's press conference. "For the first time, Donald is on the defensive. He can't spin this anymore." But Greta wasn't celebrating. She knew that this victory, while significant, wasn't the end. Donald still had resources, allies, and the capacity for revenge. Her focus remained on protecting Isabella and ensuring that their future was safe. "I'm not done fighting," she told Maya. "Not until he's held accountable for everything." A legacy shattered. As the chapter closed, Donald Cullinan's once mighty empire lay in ruins. His resignation from Cullinan Technologies was announced the following day, accompanied by a statement that attempted to shift blame onto unethical competitors and unfounded accusations. But the world wasn't listening anymore. Donald Cullinan, the golden boy of Silicon Valley, had fallen from grace, his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale of greed, hubris, and the power of those he underestimated. For Greta, the fall of Donald Cullinan was more than just a personal triumph. It was proof that even the most powerful could be held accountable, and it gave her hope that justice, for herself, for Isabella, and for everyone Donald had hurt, was finally within reach. Chapter 13. Phoenix Rising. The unearthing of Donald Cullinan's fraudulent empire was the catalyst Greta Klusner needed to begin reshaping her life on her terms. For years, Donald's shadow had loomed large, obscuring her potential and stripping her of agency. But now, with the truth revealed, Greta stood poised to reclaim not only her dignity, but also the empire Donald had tried to bury her under. The SEC's bombshell discovery. The SEC investigation had already uncovered Donald's insider trading and illegal financial schemes, but the revelation that shook the board of Cullinan Technologies to its core came as a surprise even to Maya and Greta. Deep in the labyrinth of shell companies and hidden assets, investigators found a critical flaw. The rushed prenup that Donald's lawyers had created during their whirlwind engagement had left Greta as the rightful legal owner of 51% of the company. The shares, initially funneled into offshore entities without proper documentation, had reverted to the original shareholders, making Greta the majority stakeholder by default. It was a legal loophole born of Donald's arrogance and haste, and it put Greta in a position of unprecedented power. Maya was the first to call her with the news. "Greta," she said, her voice trembling with excitement, "you're not just fighting back anymore. You're in control now." Greta sat in stunned silence, Isabella cooing softly in her arms. For months she had fought to survive, to scrape together a life for her and her daughter. Now she held the reins of a multi-billion-dollar company, the very one that Donald had used to destroy her. The board's response. Cullinan Technologies' board wasted no time in reaching out to Greta. Their loyalty to Donald had always been tenuous, tied more to his financial success than to his leadership. Now, with their stock plummeting and their reputations on the line, they saw Greta as their salvation. "Ms. Klusner," the chairman said during their first meeting, held in Meyer's office for Greta's comfort, "we recognize your rightful position as majority shareholder. We'd like to work together to stabilize the company and rebuild its reputation." Greta, dressed simply but exuding quiet confidence, listened intently. "What assurances can you give me that this company won't operate as it did under Donald?" she asked, her tone measured but firm. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. "We're prepared to implement significant reforms," the chairman replied. "Transparency, ethics training and oversight will be priorities moving forward." Greta leaned back, her hands folded in her lap. "Good," she said, "because if I'm stepping into this role, it will be on my terms. This company will be a beacon of integrity, or it won't exist at all." Greta's leadership. In the weeks that followed, Greta's transition from victim to leader became a public spectacle. Headlines praised her rise. The woman who took down Donald Cullinan from shelter to boardroom, and Phoenix Rising, Greta Klusner's transformation of Cullinan Technologies. Despite the media frenzy, Greta focused on the work. With Meyer's help, she implemented sweeping changes at Cullinan Technologies, starting with a comprehensive audit of its finances and operations. She replaced key executives who had enabled Donald's unethical practices and brought in experts known for their commitment to transparency and accountability. One of her first public acts as CEO was rebranding the company. Cullinan Technologies was renamed Phoenix Innovations, symbolizing its rebirth under Greta's leadership. "This isn't just a new chapter," Greta said at the press conference announcing the change. "This is a new story entirely, one built on innovation, integrity, and inclusivity." The announcement was met with widespread acclaim. Investors began returning, reassured by Greta's vision and determination. Employees, many of whom had felt disillusioned under Donald's leadership, found renewed purpose in their work. Personal growth. Amid the chaos of rebuilding the company, Greta found time to focus on her personal growth. She enrolled in leadership courses, seeking to hone her skills as a CEO. She also attended therapy sessions with Dr. Patel, who helped her process the trauma of her past and prepare for the challenges ahead. "You're not just leading a company," Dr. Patel told her during one session. "You're leading a movement. But don't forget to take care of yourself too. You've come so far, and you deserve to enjoy this new chapter." Greta took the advice to heart, carving out moments of joy with Isabella. They spent weekends at the park, baking cookies and reading bedtime stories together. For all her professional achievements, Greta's proudest role was that of a mother. Donald's reaction. Donald Cullinan, once the face of Silicon Valley's success, was now its cautionary tale. Facing multiple federal charges, he spent his days in courtrooms and depositions, watching helplessly as his empire crumbled. The news that Greta now controlled his company hit him harder than any indictment. "She's taking everything," he ranted to his lawyer during a meeting. "Everything I built." But his protests fell on deaf ears. The world had moved on, and Greta's rise was seen as a symbol of justice, prevailing over greed and arrogance. A legacy rewritten Phoenix Innovations thrived under Greta's leadership, becoming a model for ethical practices in the tech industry. Greta established initiatives to support women in STEM, survivors of abuse, and underrepresented groups in technology. The company's profits soared, but its greatest success was the lives it changed. The Isabella Rose Initiative, named after Greta's daughter, provided scholarships and mentorship programs for young women pursuing careers in tech. Greta also launched the Phoenix Fund, which supported survivors of domestic and financial abuse, helping them rebuild their lives just as she had rebuilt hers. Her work earned her accolades and invitations to speak at global forums. But Greta remained grounded, always attributing her success to the people who had supported her along the way. "This isn't just my story," she said during a speech at a United Nations event. "It's the story of every woman who refuses to be defined by her circumstances. Together, we can rise from the ashes." A lesson for the betrayed and broken. Greta's journey from betrayal to triumph is a powerful reminder that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to rise. For every woman who has faced heartbreak, injustice, or loss, her story offers hope. 1. Your worth is not defined by others. Greta's worth wasn't tied to Donald or his wealth. It was inherent, and she rediscovered it when she chose to fight back. 2. Healing takes time, but it's possible. Through therapy, support, and determination, Greta turned her pain into purpose. Healing isn't linear, but it's achievable. 3. Adversity can lead to transformation. Greta's challenges became the catalyst for her growth. Every setback was an opportunity to learn, rebuild, and rise stronger. 4. You have the power to rewrite your story. Greta refused to let Donald define her narrative. She took control of her life and created a legacy that was entirely her own. As Greta stood in her office, watching Isabella play with a toy spaceship, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The road had been long and arduous, but she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. Her message to others was simple. You are more than your struggles. You are capable of rising from the ashes, just like the phoenix. And rise she did. Chapter 14. Sweet Victory. 5 years had passed since the darkest chapter of Greta Klusner's life, and now, as she sat in the sunlit CEO's office of Phoenix Innovations, she felt a profound sense of peace and purpose. The transformation of Cullinan Technologies into Phoenix Innovations had been more than just a rebranding. It was a resurrection of a company and a woman who had been underestimated, broken, and left for dead. The office was a perfect balance of elegance and practicality, designed to reflect Greta's leadership style. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered sweeping views of the San Francisco skyline, and the walls were adorned with art created by women supported by Phoenix's outreach programs. In the corner, Isabella, now a spirited 5-year-old, played with a set of blocks, giggling as she built a tower that wobbled precariously. "Careful, sweetheart," Greta said with a smile, glancing over as she signed a new partnership agreement. This deal, like so many others she had championed, was close to her heart. A multi-million-dollar investment in women's shelters, focusing on vocational training and education for single mothers. Phoenix Innovations had become a global powerhouse, not just in tech, but in its commitment to social impact. Under Greta's leadership, the company had tripled its valuation, expanded into new markets, and set an industry standard for ethical practices. But it wasn't just the numbers that defined her success. It was the lives she had touched along the way. A legacy of empowerment. Greta's initiatives had reshaped the industry, creating opportunities for women and marginalized groups who had long been excluded from tech. The Isabella Rose Initiative had funded thousands of scholarships for young women pursuing STEM degrees, while the Phoenix Fund supported survivors of abuse in rebuilding their lives. Her work had earned her international acclaim. Time magazine named her one of the most influential women of the decade, and she had been invited to speak at the United Nations about the intersection of technology and social responsibility. But Greta remained grounded, never forgetting the journey that had brought her here. "It's not about me," she often said in interviews. "It's about creating a world where women don't have to fight as hard as I did to be seen, heard, and respected." Donald's decline. While Greta soared, Donald Cullinan's life had become a cautionary tale. Facing multiple federal charges, he lived in obscurity, far removed from the spotlight he once craved. The man who had built an empire on ambition and deceit was now a symbol of hubris and downfall. From time to time, Donald would see Greta's name in the headlines or catch a news segment about Phoenix Innovations' latest achievement. Each mention was a painful reminder of the empire he had lost and the woman he had underestimated. Their paths crossed one final time at a shareholders' meeting. Donald, appearing gaunt and subdued, was there as part of a court-mandated settlement to relinquish his remaining shares. Greta, elegant in a tailored power suit, acknowledged him with a calm, composed demeanor that spoke volumes. As the meeting concluded, Greta approached him. Her voice was steady, her expression unreadable. "Thank you, Donald," she said. He raised an eyebrow, confused. "For what?" "For underestimating me," she replied with a faint smile. It was the last thing she ever said to him, and it echoed in his mind long after she walked away. A future rewritten. Back in her office, Greta leaned back in her chair and watched Isabella, now pretending to be a CEO herself as she signed papers with a crayon. Greta's heart swelled with pride and gratitude. Her journey hadn't been easy. She had faced betrayal, loss, and challenges that could have broken her. But instead, she had risen from the ashes, stronger and more determined than ever. She had reclaimed her life and built a legacy that would endure for generations. She had not sought revenge against Donald. Instead, she had sought justice. And in doing so, she had found her true destiny, not just as a mother or a leader, but as a woman who refused to let the world define her worth. A lesson for the betrayed and cheated. Greta's story is one of resilience, strength, and transformation. A testament to the power of believing in yourself when the world tries to silence you. For every woman who has been betrayed, cheated, or left behind, her journey offers hope. It's a reminder that no matter how dark the night, the dawn will come. No matter how deep the betrayal, healing is possible. And no matter how impossible the odds, you can rise again, not just to survive, but to thrive. Greta's life had been shattered, but she picked up the pieces and built something extraordinary. She turned pain into purpose, transforming her scars into a roadmap for others to follow. To every woman facing her own trials, Greta's story says this: you are not defined by what happens to you. You are defined by how you rise from it. And to those who try to break others, beware. For the ones you underestimate today may rise to become the phoenixes of tomorrow, blazing a path of hope and justice for all who come after. As Greta signed the last of her documents for the day, Isabella climbed into her lap, wrapping her tiny arms around her mother's neck. "Mommy, are we going home now?" "Yes, my love," Greta replied, kissing her daughter's forehead. "We're going home, and we're going forward." And with that, Greta Klusiner, CEO, mother and survivor, turned off the lights in her office, leaving behind the story of her rise and carrying forward the promise of her future. A lesson for betrayed, cheated, and divorced women. Greta's story is a beacon of hope for anyone who has ever faced betrayal, injustice, or loss. It is a reminder that life does not end when someone tries to break you. Instead, it is an opportunity to rediscover your strength and create a new beginning. 1. You are stronger than you think. Betrayal and heartbreak can feel like the end, but they are often the beginning of a transformation. Greta faced overwhelming odds, betrayal, homelessness, and isolation, but she found strength she didn't know she had. Her story proves that even in your darkest moments, resilience is within you. Second, reclaim your power. When Greta's life fell apart, she refused to stay a victim. She sought help, stood up for herself, and fought for what was right. If someone has taken advantage of you, manipulated you, or left you broken, remember, the power to rise is yours. Take one step at a time, and don't be afraid to ask for help. 3. You define your worth. Greta was once defined by Donald's wealth, influence, and abuse, but she learned that her worth was not tied to him or anyone else. Your value is intrinsic, unshakable, and independent of anyone who tries to diminish it. Fourth, turn pain into purpose. Instead of seeking revenge, Greta used her pain to build a better future for herself and others. Her story reminds us that healing isn't just about moving on, it's about creating meaning from hardship. Use your experiences to grow, to inspire others, and to craft a life you're proud of. 5. The best revenge is success. Greta didn't set out to destroy Donald. She set out to rebuild her life. Her success was a byproduct of her determination, hard work, and refusal to let him define her story. Your success, whether in your career, relationships, or personal growth, is the ultimate triumph over those who wronged you. A final message. To every woman who has been betrayed, cheated, or left to pick up the pieces, know this: you are not alone and you are not powerless. The road to healing may be long, but it is worth walking. Remember Greta's journey. Her life wasn't perfect, and her battles weren't easy, but she rose from the ashes stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. So can you. No one can take away your potential, your courage, or your ability to rise again. And when you do, you won't just survive, you'll thrive. You are the phoenix, and your best days are yet to come.